My name is Vishwanathan Sahasranamam, and before you count the number of A's in my name, I'll be done with the session. My last name in Sanskrit actually means 1,000 names. So you can call me Vish, Vishwanath, Vishwa, Vishwanathan. You can call me any format of my name, but don't call me names. Yeah? All right. Okay. So I come from Coimbatore, and what I'm going to do, I usually do this in about 2.5 hours, but it's a very time-shrinked session, so I'm going to go a bit fast. But what I'll promise is, if there are questions, I'll probably take them over tea. I'll probably take them over the rest of today and tomorrow. Is that okay? Yeah? All right. Okay. Okay. So, well, I might come across as a very bold and a courageous person, but I have my set of fears, right? So, what do I fear the most? The first thing is these horror stories, horror movies, right? I can't stand them. You know, I just literally run away, right? The next, lizards, all kinds of lizards, right? The lizards you see on the walls, the lizards you see on the trees. I'm really scared of these ones, right? The third and the most important fear, angry professors, right? I carried that fear from the days I went to engineering, and then I went to MBA to do my MBA in IIM Bangalore. That fear hasn't gone away. Right? But beyond these three fears, there's something that I absolutely fear the most in my life. And I've had this fear for the last 9 years, ever since I started working in the startup ecosystem. So I wrote the first business plan for Myntra.com back in 2008. Right? I was a fool not to take equity, I took a fee. Right? So the fear I have most is this. Anyone that comes to me, any person that comes to me and says, I have an idea. I fear this situation the most. Why? Because this person, whoever is this person who has an idea, right? In his mind or in her mind, this is the next biggest thing that's waiting to happen in the world. Right? They're so passionately believing that this is the next biggest thing in the world, and they come to me. There is this unstoppable force that comes to me and says, I have an idea. And what's going on in my mind? I'm actually putting a wall in front of them, and I'm saying, are you sure? So this I have an idea unstoppable force comes to me, and I am this giant wall which has are you sure written on it. Now, are you sure what? Are you sure, number one, what are you selling to who? Right? Are you sure? What are you selling to who? Are you sure how can you profit by selling this? Are you sure how much profit can I make? Can you make? Right? So this unstoppable force comes to me, and I'm basically asking them 3 questions. Yeah, you have an idea. How does it matter? Do you have a business idea? Which is, you have a very clear, crisp answer to the question, what am I selling to who? Do you have that? Do you have a business model? Which is, how can I profit by selling this? And do you have a business plan, which is the answer to the question, how much profit can I make? Right? So you can naturally imagine why this has become a fear. Right? Because basically the person comes to me with, I have an idea, and in my mind I'm saying, oh my God, is this person ready with the answers to these 3 questions? Because that's what matters. Right? Now, how many of you don't agree that these answers to these 3 questions don't matter? Right? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the world's simplest business. Right? I'm going to take the world's simplest business, and I'm going to help you understand why these 3 questions matter to that person who's running or who wants to start the world's simplest business. Shall we do that? Yeah? Alright. So here's Ram. Right? He's a wage worker. right? Let's say he makes about 8,000 rupees a month as a wage laborer, like daily wage laborer. He makes about 8,000 rupees a month. He says, I have an idea. I want to become a vegetable vendor. Right? So the question I'm asking is, okay, what are you selling to who? Right? What does he say? I want to sell vegetables to 120 apartments in the 7th Cross in an area called Sai Baba Colony in the city I live, in Coimbatore. If he was only telling me, I want to become a vegetable vendor, that's, yeah, an idea. But if you're telling me, I am selling this to this, then yeah, you have a business idea. Does he have the answer to this? He has the answer to this. Why? Because look at what he's trying to do. He's selling a vegetable. He's selling vegetables on a vegetable cart. Right? Now, when you're selling vegetables in a vegetable cart, who can you sell to? You can sell to a few apartments in an area. Right? But if you're just saying, I want to become a vegetable vendor, look at the possibilities. Is this guy going to set up a store? Is this guy going to set up a store in a retail complex? Is this guy going to set up a store in a mandi, in a wholesale area? Or is this guy going to be the next big basket? Right? I have an idea actually does not mean anything at all. What starts to matter is the answer to the question, what am I selling to, which is, what is my business idea? Right? Move on. Now, why do this business? He's earning 8,000 rupees. Right? He's earning 8,000 rupees. Why do this business? Because he says, earn a living. In other words, he wants to earn more than 8,000 rupees. Right? Now, how will he do that? He will do that if his business earns a profit. Right? Let's look at it from another perspective. Will you give Ram a loan of rupees 5,000 at 10% daily interest to start his business? Let's say he comes to you and asks you this question. Will you give me 5,000 rupees at 10% daily so that I can start my vegetable cart vendor business? Will you? Yes or no? Right? Now, what decides this answer? What details would you like to know? Right? So the question is, what gives you the confidence to give the loan? As the investor, what gives you the confidence to give the loan? Whereas from the entrepreneur's point of view, what gives him the confidence to take the loan? The first question that matters is this: how to earn profit by selling vegetables to these kinds of customers in this area? How does he earn profit? He wakes up at 4 a.m. He takes your 5,000 rupee daily interest, 10% daily interest loan. He goes to the wholesale market, right? He buys vegetables for 5,000 rupees. He puts them on the cart. He stands next to the apartment. He sells them, let's say at 6,000 rupees. That's the revenue he makes. And then he has 6,000 rupees in hand. What does he do? He goes back to the wholesale market, buys vegetables for 6,000 rupees, comes and does the same thing, sell it all off. Then maybe he takes a break for lunch. And then once again he goes back to the market, buys vegetables, brings it back, puts it on the cart, sells it. Let's say he does it 3-4 times a day. Right? At the end of the day, he basically has turned over this 5,000 rupees that he started with 4 times. Every time he makes, let's say, a 20% profit. Right? So you can imagine the amount of profit he makes at the end of the day. Right? Now, if that profit is in excess of the 500 rupees he has to pay at the end of the day, what does he owe at? What was he owing the loan shark at 4 a.m.? 5,000 plus 500. Right? Which means his profit for the day should have been at least 501. Otherwise, is there any point in doing this business? In fact, it should be much more than 1 rupee profit, because he has to make a minimum of 8,000 rupees per month. Otherwise, it does not make any sense for him to start this business. He better go back and be the wage laborer. Right? So I first need to understand, how does this business make profit? So I take a loan, go to the wholesale, I buy vegetables at a certain cost, I sell them at a margin, and I turn that over at least 3 or 4 times a day. And at the end of the day, if the profit margin I make is in excess of my interest costs and other costs, right, then that's how this business makes profit. And it's not only enough if I know how much profit or how the business makes profit every day. This is one day. I need to also be able to project it for at least a month. Do you think this guy is going to run this business just for one day? Just for 1 month? He wants to do it for at least a certain longer duration, right? So the next question that matters is, how much profit by selling vegetables? So I know the answer to the question, how does the business make profit? Or in other words, how to earn profit, which is the business model. So one thing I realized after my MBA is that I spent about 15 lakhs in fees. I stayed out of income for 2 years. And then they pretty much didn't teach me the most important question and the answer. They confused me with everything on the topic of business model. This is one thing that will hit you when you're in the startup ecosystem. Business model, business model. Do you have a business model? Is there a business model? All of us are going to harass you for the next 2 days asking these questions. We're all loaded up. Right? But what does it really mean? It means very simply this. Business model is nothing but the answer to the question, how can you profit by selling this? How does your business make profit? What's that formula? Right? I need to know this, and then I need to know how much profit. What is that? Business plan. Right? So if I know how the vegetable vendor makes profit in 1 day, what do I have to do? I have to now project it over a week, a month, a quarter, a year. That's my business plan. Right? So how many of you went to Google to download a business plan template? Be honest. Right? Now why do you need a template? That template was made for somebody else. Right? If you know the answer to the question, this is how my business is going to make profit, then build your template. Right? Do you think Ram downloaded a business template business plan template from Google before he came up to me and said, give me 5,000 rupees at 10% daily interest? Right? Alright. So, for the world's simplest business, if any of you can think of an even more simpler business, please tell me, I'll change that. The next time I do this, I'll put that as the example. Right? So the world's simplest business, yes. That entrepreneur has answers to these 3 questions, yes. Very clearly? Very clearly? Yes? Yes? Do you? Right? How many of you agree that your business is even slightly more complex than Ram's business? Yeah? So if Ram, for that simple business, has answers to these 3 questions, do you guys have that? Because definitely your business is at least a little more complex than his business. Right? Okay? So these 3 questions, you need to have answers with absolute clarity. Alright, so let's move on. So what do you see here? A new IT BPO company? Yeah? The question, is this a startup? Is this a startup? Yeah? I'm playing a little out of syllabus when it comes to the definition of startup by Government of India as well as by the Himachal government. Yeah? But there's a reason why I'm doing this, right? Now what's new? How does this what does this IT BPO business sell and to who? There's an answer to that question. Is that new? Just like every 1,000, 10,000, million other IT BPO businesses that have been around. Right? Now, how does this IT BPO business make profit? Is there anything new in the way it makes profit? It's been around. Right? How much profit will this IT BPO business make? Is that business plan going to be any different from the thousands of business plans we've had for IT BPO companies? So what's new? So is this new IT BPO company a startup? No. It's a small business. Right? Move on. A new gym in the town. Is this a startup? What's new? No. It's a small business. A new cafe in the town. Is this a startup? No. What's new? Nothing new. It's a small business. So the point is, every new business is not a startup. Right? Okay, how many of you have played this game 20 questions? Right? So what do you do in 20 questions? So let's say Aditya and I are playing that game. Aditya thinks about something, let's say Marilyn Monroe, right? And I have to ask him 20 questions for which he can only give yes or no answers, right? And with those yes or no answers, I have to basically guess that you are thinking Marilyn Monroe, right? 20 questions. What's the winning strategy in 20 questions? Is it asking more yes questions or asking more no questions? No questions. What does it do? Literally, the universe is the set I start with. Right? When I'm starting, it's the universe. Right? Maybe we will say places, or maybe we will say famous personalities, or something like that. Right? But it's still a huge, lot of items that you can potentially think. Right? Now, how do I start narrowing it down to something that's more manageable? Which means I need to eliminate. Right? Which means I have to ask no questions. Right? The same thing. So before I try to define what is a startup, what matters more is to understand what is not a startup. Right? And another marketing tip for you. More than you understand who your customer is, you need to understand who your customer is not. That clarity is more important, right? So every new business is not a startup. So what is a startup? And for that, I'm going to start with a story. I call it the tale of two business ideas. Right? So let's say I am this investor in town, and I'm looking for interesting new ideas, business ideas, in the food restaurant sector. Right? And the word spreads around, and people know that if you have a new restaurant business idea, you can go to Vish and he wants to invest money in. Right? So two entrepreneurs call up my assistant and they say, well, we want to meet him and pitch. And she says, okay, fine. One of you come at 10 o'clock on a Monday. The other person comes at 11 o'clock on a Monday. So I have two appointments set up. 10 o'clock, I'm going in, first meeting, first entrepreneur. Hi, hello. We sit down and I ask him, hey, what is your new business idea in the food restaurant sector? And he says, my idea is to launch a new fine dining restaurant in this town. It will have interiors that looks like this. It will have a great kitchen. It will have top of the line chefs. We will cook and deliver multi-cuisine, and we will have the finest fine dining restaurant in town. I need 10 crores. I need 10 crores because I need money to set up the interiors. I will take a 4,000 square feet, location, a store in a upmarket, upscale location in the town. I will set the interiors. I will set up the kitchen. I will hire chefs and the staff, and I will do branding. I'll do advertising. I'll do marketing. I need 10 crores. Will you invest? Right? So I have to make a decision. I have to make a yes or no decision. Right? Now let's look at what goes in my mind. Right? I'm asking the same thing. Right? Are you sure? Yeah? Now, what's new in this? It's a fine dining restaurant. Right? Are you sure? What are you selling to who? Of course we know. Right? How does a fine dining restaurant business make profit? We know. How much profit can a fine dining restaurant business make? We know. Right? Now, if I ask him, are you sure? And he gives me the answers to these questions, right? I'm basically left with the next more important question, which is, what is the proof? Now, what is the proof? Is this the first fine dining restaurant ever? Right? There's possibly 2 down the street where we had that meeting. Right? Now, if I ask him what is the proof, what will he say? Well, what do you mean, what is the proof? Well, come with me. I have a friend of mine who's been running a fine dining restaurant for the last 3 years, and he's running it profitably. Well, come with me. I'll show you the financials of the restaurant, and you can take a look and you can understand, yeah, why this is how a fine dining restaurant business makes a profit. Right? Okay, so I finished that meeting and I say, well, you know what, I'll get back to you. I finished that meeting, and the 11 o'clock appointment, that guy comes in and he says his idea, his new business idea in the food restaurant space is he's going to do a fine dining restaurant but with a twist. In fact, he has 2 twists. Twist number 1, no kitchen. So his fine dining restaurant is not going to have a kitchen. He's actually going to get food cooked by professional amateur chefs at their premises, and he's going to have the food carted over to the restaurant where you will only have the fine dining area, and the food is going to be delivered with a fine dining experience. Right? And naturally, the second twist, if there are so many of these 15, 20 professional amateur chefs who are going to be cooking food, how can you have a menu card? Now, what if Aditya wakes up today and he says, you know what, today I'm in the mood to cook some Turkish delights? Well, then the menu is Turkish delights. Right? So he says, this is a surprise factor. Right? So the value proposition that I'm giving to my diners, that's the name of people who go to fine dining restaurants. They're not customers, they're diners. Right? So my value proposition to the diners is that you will get a surprise menu. So if you want to be surprised this weekend, well, head to my restaurant. Right? So he says, my idea, my new business idea is to set up a fine dining restaurant without a kitchen, without a menu card. Right? Now, are you sure? What is he selling to who? He wants to sell good food and fine dining experience to the diners. But he also has to sell the fact that professional amateur chefs will have to now cook for him for a fee, right? On which predicates this entire model. Is that selling or what? He's got to sell, right? Yeah, when hosts put up their properties on Airbnb, are the hosts selling to Airbnb or is Airbnb selling to the hosts? Get it? Right? So I need to be able to sell the fact that if you cook and deliver food to my fine dining restaurant, you'll actually make more money than what you are doing today. Right? And I need to be able to sell the fact that it's not just fine dining food and experience. I'm also selling you the fact that you can get surprised. So if you're the adventurous kind, I'm selling you emotional value, social value, hedonic value. Right? Now, is this being done before? Right? Is that something new? So naturally, if I'm selling something not sold before, right? How can I make a profit, and how much profit can I make by selling that is all new. They're also new. Right? So naturally, if I have this in my mind and I ask him the same question, what is the proof? What is the proof? Right? If this is the first fine dining restaurant without a kitchen, without a menu card, there is no proof. Which means there is no proven answer to the 3 questions: business idea, business model, business plan. right? So let's look at it from the investor's perspective, right? Business model. The case of the fine dining restaurant, the conventional fine dining restaurant, it's proven, documented, done several times over and over and again, right? We clearly know that in that case, the risk is not one of whether the business model will be viable. The risk is execution. Yeah, I give this guy 10 crores. Will he actually be able to use that money, set this up and operate this fine dining restaurant and then give me a profit in 3 years? Right? It's an execution risk. Whereas in this case, I don't even know what's the model. Right? Well, it might look very similar at the very surface level, which is, how does this fine dining restaurant with a twist make profit? Well, the same thing, right? You set up the restaurant, you get food cooked over, you serve in the fine dining area, and then your customers will pay, your diners will pay. You make gross margins, right? Gross margins over a period of time will start recovering your operating costs. You start making operating profits, and operating profits over a period of, let's say, 3 years will help you recover the money that went into setting up this restaurant. Well, yeah, the process is not very different from this. But then there are two major assumptions. How many such amateur professional cooks, chefs will cook for you? Will you have enough of those? On the one side, that's on the supply side, right? On the demand side, how many customers, how many such diners will be okay, will accept the value proposition that I go to a restaurant that does not have a menu card? It's an assumption. It needs to be validated, right? Now, if you don't have enough of these chefs on the supply side, if you don't have enough of these customers on the demand side, what can go wrong? My projections of revenue, my projections of costs can go wrong. Which means, inherently, this business model and this business plan is very different from this business model and this business plan. Which means this entrepreneur can go ahead and execute for profit because the business model and the business plan are proven. Whereas this entrepreneur has to now explore for proof. And what's the two important proofs that he needs to prove? There are enough number of chefs and there are enough number of customers, diners who find this value proposition valuable, right? I need to prove that. So I first have to explore for proof before I can execute for profit, whereas this guy can start with execution, right? So what proof? Proof that the problem can be solved profitably. He's trying to solve a problem, right? What problem? The problem that professional chefs, amateur chefs, don't have an opportunity to monetize their skills. Look at professional chefs, right? I mean, if you take top of the line chefs, they are more in a supervisory role, right? They would be working for either top restaurants, independent standalone restaurants, or they will be working for restaurants inside of hotels, right? Now, they only have a supervisory role, whereas they have the skills at hand and they have all of the things you need to be able to put that skill to work, and you can cook some amazing food. Can I create an opportunity for them to monetize their skills? That's a problem, right? What about the diners? There isn't enough opportunity in the town for me to get surprised. That's a social value. Now imagine, one of us going to such a fine dining restaurant that does not have a menu card, having a nice time, and then going back to work on a Monday morning, and over cooler, we're talking, hey, how was your weekend? And there is this guy that gives me a very standard answer. Oh yeah, I went to this fine dining restaurant. It's been around for some time. We had a good time. Took my family out. And then this guy tells me, hey, you know what? I went to this fine dining restaurant that doesn't have a kitchen. Heck, it doesn't even have a menu card. Now, who looks better? Who looks the more adventurous? Right? So there's some kind of an emotional, social value attached to it, right? So I'm trying to solve problems, right, with this kind of a model. And there's also another problem I'm solving. It takes me 10 crores to set up a conventional fine dining restaurant because it takes 6 crores for the dining, it takes 4 crores for the kitchen. Whereas this guy says, I'll get it done at 6 crores because I don't need money for kitchen. Right? So I'm also solving another problem. I'm trying to create an asset light food tech startup. Right? We were talking a lot about that yesterday. Right? So I'm solving problems, but the question is, can you do so profitably? Right? Otherwise, you're Mother Teresa in the modern tech world. Or you have a Bansal last name. Right? So this fine dining restaurant without a kitchen, without a menu card, needs proof. Hence, startup. Am I making sense? Right? I'm not talking about defining startups in the procedural sense, in the policy sense. I'm talking about defining startup from the point of view of what is the roadmap for the founder. Right? If let's say there are these two entrepreneurs, conventional fine dining restaurant, this innovative fine dining restaurant, do you think they'll be doing the exact same things from day one? Right? This guy can go raise 10 crores, either from a bank or from an investor, and starts executing. Whereas this guy, he has to do something different. He's got to prove that he has 15, 20 chefs on his roster. So what does he need for that? Does he need 6 crores? I don't think so. Right? He's got to prove that there are people willing to go to a restaurant where there isn't a menu card, where there isn't a kitchen. Do you actually need to build a 6 crore fine dining area to prove that? No. Can I make use of corporate banquets? Yeah? Right? So there are different ways in which we can look at how the two founders act differently. Hence, we need a more pragmatic definition of what is a startup and what is not, because the founders' behaviors, their intent, their roadmap, their vision, their priorities are very different. Right? So I hope I've given you a very simple checklist to decide whether you are or are not a startup. Irrespective of you getting selected for incubation tomorrow, that question still remains. Right? So I'm not putting a spanner into any of the selection work that's happening today and tomorrow. Don't get me wrong. Right? I'm not changing the rules of the game just after the game started. No, I'm not doing that. I'm only telling you these 3 questions have to be there with you until when you get to proof. Right? So every new business is not a startup. What is a startup? A startup is an experiment to build proof for solving the problem effectively and profitably. It's an experiment. It's not very unlike what scientists do. Right? What does the scientist do? He comes up with a theory. He comes up with a hypothesis. Right? And what does he say? Okay, I'm going to devise this experiment. Right? I'm going to perform this experiment. And if this happens, the theory is right. And if this does not happen, the theory is wrong. Right? Now, when you present the expectations in this manner, both outcomes have their own logical next steps. What happens if the theory is proven wrong? You basically go back to the drawing table and then you say, okay, no, fine, maybe I'll have to hypothesize it differently, and then you perform another experiment. In the case where it is proven that the theory is right, what do? Well, you file a patent, you launch a research, a more extensive, comprehensive research innovation process, or you try to commercialize, you do whatever you do. Right? So that's exactly how a startup founder needs to look at the road ahead. I have an idea. An idea is to solve a problem. Can I do so profitably? And I'm exploring towards that. Right? So the journey starts with an idea. Now each of you had that spark go off in your head at some stage. Right? Now if you actually look at it for what it is, at its very simplest form, what is this idea? Solution to a problem. Right? Either something you encountered, or you saw a lot of people around you encounter, and you said, well, hang on, you know what, that can be solved. Right? Now what do you do straight after that? You start building the solution. Right? What can you build to solve the problem? Now what you build to solve the problem is not what your customer is going to buy. Right? So I had this startup about 6 months back in Coimbatore. They came up and said, well, you know what, 80% of the engineering graduates who come from tier 2, tier 3 institutions are not employable, right? Primarily because, one, they go to institutions that lack good quality of education. They lack good teachers who have themselves not been in, let's say IT industry, for example, right? Who are themselves not IT practitioners or IT experts. And most importantly, these students typically come from a Tamil medium, and then they go through English medium in the college, in the engineering college. So there is a medium of instruction problem as well. So these three problems largely contribute to why 80% or more graduates are not employable, let's say in the IT sector. Problem? Defined? Okay, what's your product? We are going to build a MOOC platform in which we will have videos and online MOOC kind of courses in Tamil medium delivered. The videos will be delivered by IT practitioners, IT experts who have industry experience, and these students will have to go through these online courses and take assessments, and by this we will make sure that they will all get employable. Right? What is this? A solution to solve the problem? Now, who will buy a MOOC platform with videos, with content, with IT practitioners? Who's the customer? Is the student going to pay for it? Do you really think so? It's like, when I went to do business in China the first time, they said this: if you're doing business in China, you only do it once. You only sell once in China. Why? Yeah, they duplicate it the next time. Right? So, do you really think you can sell content to students? Yeah? You think so? Right? So the solution to the problem is a MOOC platform with videos, online courses and vernacular delivered by IT practitioners. That's the solution. But what's the product the customer is going to buy? And is that customer the student, the teacher, the institution, or is it something else? So we realized in that process that the actual customer, where you can sell something immediately, is the small sized IT companies who are completely ignored by mainstream placements as well as by mainstream, Naukri and Monster and all of these kinds of placement agencies. They are 3 crore, 4 crore, 5 crore, 10 crore a year turnover companies who also wants talent for their IT projects and their professional services. Where are they going to hire from? Right? So we realized the actual product is a resume catalog, right, with list of students who are ready for employment, who check the basic skill sets that these small IT companies have been advertising in the local vernacular media, and they never got anyone to respond to that. Right? And the most important learning in this experience was that it's only because we were looking at these graduates from the point of view of getting selected for Infosys and such companies, and we set the bar fairly high, they were unemployed or they were not employable. But when you were able to set it at a lower level that meets the needs of these small IT companies, more of them were readily employable. Right? Which means the product here is not a training, an online tech platform with content and practitioners and delivery and all of that. The product here is a catalog of resumes, is interview scheduling, and based on interview assessment, do some quick skills training and send them to work. You see the difference? Right? So what can you build to solve the problem has to shift to what is product. And what is the product? What will the customer buy and use to solve the problem? Right? So not always the beneficiary from where the problem statement emerges will end up becoming the customer. Right? Now if I don't, and if those are two different beneficiaries, then my solution is not the product. That's my point. Right? So what I can build, yeah, that's my solution. But that's not what my customer is going to buy and use. That's something else, because the beneficiary changes. So in this case, it was not the student beneficiary, it was the small IT company beneficiary. Right? So that's going from solution to the problem to product for the market. Right? What's the market here? All of those small IT companies? That's the market. Right? So I go from a solution to a problem to a product for a market. That's the first transformation that I need to do as a startup founder. Go from an idea to a product. Right? Now why does this product for the market matter is because sales, and I'll come to that, sales. Business is about what are you selling to who? Can I sell MOOC platform to students? No. Right? So what's your business idea? My business idea is selling resume catalogs with interview scheduling, with skills assessment report, and some custom training modules for small IT companies. Because if I go from solution to product, and if I have this market formation of similar customers, my sales process will lead to repeatable revenues. And that's when a business becomes viable. What do you call a business? An activity of supply side as well as demand side that leads to repeatable revenues. That's what you call a business. Otherwise, it's just an activity, or it's a set of activities. Right? So this idea should translate into two steps forward, go to a product, and for the product to go to sales, which leads to repeatable revenues. Right? Now when we talk in terms of product, what we are actually looking at is that these four variables are same. So it's the same target customer. Right? Because if it's a different type of a customer, what will change? Your product or service will change. If my product or service changes, is my revenues repeatable? No, I'm doing something else. Right? If I'm doing something else, what happens to my cost? My cost goes up and down. It's like every order I get, I have to do something different. Right? Then how is my revenue becoming repeatable? My sales process and my sales cost has to be the same. Right? And my revenue model and the price. That's when you have a product. Right? If I take this MOOC platform and I say, fine, okay, maybe I can't sell it to students, but what if I can sell it to institutions? Will you really think you can have one same MOOC platform? Or is it more likely that each institution will have its own? Right? So will your solution start looking like a MOOC platform with content product? Or will it start looking like a MOOC platform development services IT company? You see the difference? Right? So then it changes, right? You started with something, but then you're getting into something else. So what's that product that will have to emerge is that which has these four variables constant. So that constancy of these four variables is what is, signifies that product milestone. That's when you can say, yeah, I have a product. Or I say, yeah, that's the product I'm working towards. So you have to come out of the solution mindset to a product mindset and get into a product mindset. Right? All right. So what is a startup once again? Right? So I start with an idea. I perform an experiment to build proof for solving the problem effectively and profitably, and I call this in 2 milestones: proof of product, proof of business. Right? What is the proof that you can call anything a business? Only when it makes. Right? So the question is, how is it by selling this product to this customer am I going to generate profit? I need proof for that. That's when I can call this something that can become a business. Right? Otherwise I'm just building stuff. Right? But unless people come and buy, it doesn't become. And not only buy, but buy it in a way that I can profitably sell it, at a price that I can profitably sell it. That's what's going to make it a business. Otherwise, you know who you are. Right? So the first proof that enough customers, enough similar customers, right? Enough similar customers, right? So the discipline that a startup founder needs to have is think in terms of customer segments, not market. Right? So if I put all small IT companies in one bucket, that might have maybe 20,000 such small, let's say I define less than 10 crore revenue per year is my small IT company, and that will be 25,000 of those, let's say, in the state of Tamil Nadu. Right? Now that's the market definition. As a startup, you can't deal with the market. You can only deal with something much smaller, which is a segment. Right? Then how do I start defining my segment? Maybe I'll say, it's not every less than 10 crore IT company that's out there. It's only those IT companies that are within 5 miles of my 5-mile radius of where my office is. Because why? I need to start selling to them. And sales is the physical process. Right? Which means geographic proximity becomes a segmentation variable. And then you say, well, not every IT company in the 5-mile radius is my customer, but only those who are repeatedly advertising in the vernacular media for certain positions. So one thing is clear. They're not able to fill that role, or maybe they get but they lose, they lose, something is happening, right? So then that's the segmentation variable, right? You're suddenly down to 58 companies that fit this criteria. 58 is great, because you know what the other choice is? 0. Right? So the first thing is, who's your customer? Anyone and everyone is my customer. You know what falls in my ears? No one is your customer. Right? Yeah, I understand. The market is 25,000 less than 10 crore IT companies in Tamil Nadu. I understand. I mean, that's just good math work. If you did it in MBA, you'll get 3 credits. Useless in the real world. What I first need to figure out is, what's that segment that I can crack, nail in the next 3 months and show proof. So that segment size 58 is great. Right? So enough customers. Now what decides enough? Enough customers from which you can get repeatable revenues. Right? And how should these revenues be? The revenues should be such that they are in excess of the direct costs. Right? They are in excess of the direct costs, so that you're able to make a margin. It's called the gross margin. Right? Now if I start making gross margins per customer, if I aggregate those gross margins over all customers, I start recovering my operating costs that goes into running that business. It's otherwise called overheads. Right? Now when I start doing that, I see a predictable path towards achieving operating profit. That's what consummates a business. The point at which a business can break even. Which basically means I have a trend line, I can extend that graph. I can't extend a dot. Can I extend a dot? I mean, yeah, of course I can. Who's going to believe that? right? But so can I start seeing repeatable revenues over a month, over a quarter, over 2 quarters, over 6 quarters, 6 months, right? And can I see margins coming out of those revenues, and I see a path towards how, if I continue to run this business at this scale, at this size, in some foreseeable future, my operating profit will turn positive. That's the break-even point, right? Now that path has to be predictable, right? Which means you need to have some history, right? And then you basically extend that trend line and say, yeah, this is how it's going to turn break-even. This is what actually proves that there is a business model. It's another question whether you want to actually wait until you hit break-even at the same scale. We'll come to that, right? So for that, I have this metaphor, right? Let's say you're driving in a highway, dark night, moonless night, and a tunnel comes up, and your car has to go through the tunnel. No GPS, no maps is going to work. Absolute pitch dark. You're driving your car through the tunnel, worrying if your car will hit the boulders on the sides. And then you actually see this light at the end of the tunnel. The moment you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're safe, right? Or do you actually have to get to the end of the tunnel to feel safe? To feel safe, is it enough if I see the light at the end of the tunnel, or do I actually have to get to the end of the tunnel? Right? That's exactly what this works out to for businesses as well. It's a question of, can I see this light at the end of the tunnel? Right? I'm seeing repeatable revenues, and I'm seeing gross margins. They use this word unit economics. That's what this is, right? Yeah, I'm seeing repeatable revenues, I'm seeing gross margins at the same growth. Maybe assume a certain higher rate of growth on both revenues, as well as on the cost side. You're saying, well, you know what, I will possibly be able to cut down on my cost when it comes to customer acquisition and sales, which means you're growing your margins, right? And my rate of revenue is also growing. Can I now start extending this trend line and take it to a point where operating break-even will happen? That's the end of the tunnel. But at some stage, I can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Proof of business is about getting to that light at the end of the tunnel, not the end of the tunnel, right? Because at that point, the next question is, okay, fine, can you scale up this business? All right, so let's look at the kind of businesses that used to exist before the whole venture capital, technology, business models, and all of these things, became a huge rage, right? So traditionally, there were two types of enterprises, right? So there were these what are called small businesses, right? Like restaurants, cafes, gyms, right? Salons, right? Small retail stores in different segments of retail. Right? Now, if you look at these businesses, let's say you set up a store and you do a revenue of X at a cost of, let's say, 0.95X. Right? Now, if you want to scale up this from X to 2X, what do? You add another store. Right? Or you add another floor of the same size. Right? Now, if you go from X to 2X, right? The cost would be 0.95 into 2, which is 1.9x, and a little less than that. It will be like 1.895x. Right? So in other words, the impact on profit by doubling revenue is minuscule. Now you go all the way to 10x, which means I add 8 more stores, for example. Right? So I go all the way to 10x in revenue. Now the cost on straight line extrapolation will be 9.5x, but it will be 9.3x. The question is, what's the point of the effort of going from 1 store to 10 stores when the impact on profit is minuscule? Right? So this is why these businesses remained small businesses. There's a reason why they were called small businesses, because they are inherently non-scalable. In other words, the effort at which you scale comes with a very insignificant impact or a non-justifiable impact on profit. Right? So these were one type of enterprises that used to exist, and they still exist, right, all around us, right? The other end is these large enterprises, right? So think of a steel plant, right? So imagine revenue X maps to 1,000 tons, right? So if I set up a capacity for 1,000 tons, and if I sell all of those 1,000 tons, I make a revenue of X. The nature of the steel plant is such, the steel business is such, that even at 6X, at 6,000 tons per year capacity and utilization and complete inventory sales, I will still not be able to run the steel plant profitably. But if I hit 10,000 tons, 10x, something called economies of scale works out. What is that? The cost per unit of steel comes down, decreases, which means I start earning gross margins enough to recover my operating costs, right? And if I now run that steel plant for the next 5 years, this operating profit that I make, let's say on a monthly, quarterly basis, over the next 5 years will help me amortize my fixed cost that went into setting up this behemoth. Right? So in other words, you are profitable only after scaling up. So you scale up to become profitable. Right? So look at the risk involved in this business. It takes 3 years to just set the damn thing up. Right? So let's say 10,000 crores. 10,000 crores put upfront to set up a plant which will manufacture 10,000 tons of steel per annum. Takes 3 years to just set the damn thing up, and then you have to operate it for another 5 years for you to hit break even. Right? So these were the two types of enterprises that existed. Small businesses that are inherently non-scalable, and large enterprises which are profitable only after scaling up, or in other words, unprofitably scalable. Right? Something else happened, and we'll start with this example. So let's say there is this person who starts a small finance company in Coimbatore. You know what a small finance company does? What does it do? It gives out loans, right? Consumer loans, car loans, auto loans, small, working capital loans, small business loans, right? They're in that business, right? Now, at the same time, in Bangalore, these bunch of ex-IIT, ex-IIM, ex-McKinsey grads and employees got together and they started a fintech company. Right? Now these guys are getting awards. Best fintech startup of the year. And what did they claim is their business? We're also a finance company. And what are we going to do? We're going to give out loans. Right? The question is, why all this craze for this fintech company, whereas even the local vernacular press will not cover that there is this new small finance company which has come up in Coimbatore? Investors can't wait to put money into this, right? Whereas you don't even know the address of where these guys live and operate. So the question is why not? Right? Now naturally, if we understand the business of small finance company, we'll find the difference. Right? Now take the case of a small finance company. I process a loan of 1 lakh. Right? Now for me to process that loan, I actually have to raise that loan at 10% interest. Right? So which means I pay 20,000 rupees at source for a 1 lakh loan, and I give it out to the customer at 15%, which means I make 30,000 interest over 2 years. I'm using simple interest because I'm not great at math. Compound really confuses me. I'm using simple interest, right? So what's the gross profit? 10,000 rupees. Now if the cost of processing this loan is 10,000 rupees, what's my net profit? 0. Right? In other words, the lowest loan that this small finance company can offer is actually a little more than 10,000 rupees. Right? Because at 10,000 rupees you're just 0 equals 0. Right? Now what does the fintech company do? They make one very important change in this set of numbers, which is that they reduce the operating cost of processing a loan down from 10,000 rupees per loan to 1,000 rupees per loan. And how do they do that? Using what? Technology, right? So imagine digital technology being put into all activities that have to go into a small finance company, right? That translates into a 1/10 cost at which you can now process loans. Now look at what happens to the fintech company's numbers. At a loan amount of 10,000 rupees, I break even. Right? Which means the lowest loan that this fintech company can offer is not 1 lakh but 10,000. Which has a much bigger, larger market, a 1 lakh rupee loan or a 10,000 rupee loan. I can do payday loans. Right? Now look at it in terms of how this matters from an investor's point of view, right? So operating cost 10,000 rupees down to 1,000 rupees. The lowest loan amount is not a lakh but 10,000 rupees. The demand is not 10 times, it's 100 times. It is exponentially higher because it's a much smaller amount. Look at the number of people who just came up the water level, because the water level just went down now. Right? So let's say if I process an average loan amount of 1.5 lakhs, whereas I process an average loan of 15,000, my total loan processed is 1.15 lakhs versus 1.5 crores. Scale? Yeah? What's the impact on profit? Right? So now we understand why this company is written about, whereas this is not even talked about. Right? So the benefits of fintech. Right? So let's look at how technology plays a role. Right? So makes finance company operations very efficient, so naturally brings down the cost of operating a finance company. And how does this translate to business impact? Smaller loans, more number of loans. Now I can not only serve customers in my vicinity, the small finance company can possibly serve customers in 2 kilometers radius, because everything is physical, right? I got to check this, that, lots of things. Whereas if I use technology, I can have a much larger catchment area, right? So not only my number of loans go up, my demand, my target addressable market, TAM, goes up, right? And together, what they lead to is the possibility of a high growth business, right? So now, what investors want to see, and what you should as startup founders be looking to achieve in life, is if your business has this kind of a chart where revenue scales at NX with cost growing at X. This is at the heart of what happened in Silicon Valley, and when the whole tech startup craze started. Because this created a third form of an enterprise, unlike the two others. The small business, which is inherently not scalable, and the large enterprise, which is very risky. You got to scale it only to become profitable. This comes up, where you use technology and you put it to work. And where does technology really have a play? Both, right? It opens up demand, and it also lowers the cost at which you're able to cater to that demand, right? So it puts a wedge between the revenue curve and the cost curve. right? So these are profitable revenue growth enterprises, right? So naturally, the small finance business, whereas in the case of the fintech startup, you look at the possibility of a digital finance enterprise, and that's why it's investable, right? Now the journey starts like this, right? So imagine you have a seed in hand, you make a small hole in the ground, you put it in, you close it with soil, you put some manure, you put some water, and you let it be. In a few days you see a small sapling come up. Now for this sapling to grow, either become a small tomato plant or a big banyan tree, depends on what? On the seed. And that's your idea, right? So if you come up with a small business idea, a small business owner thinks in terms of a small business idea that has the potential to become a small tomato plant. If you can come up with a startup idea that can potentially become a banyan tree, which essentially has a revenue cost curve that looks like this, that's what you're in search of. I have something more to do, but I'm going to pause here and maybe take some questions. And if there is a session that I can do in the later part of the day. All right, thank you so much.